that really stood out to you, like a lesson of outreach that you really felt that Jesus showed you whilst living in the slum in Bangkok? What would that be? I know that's a big question, but what's your thoughts?
I think that one that really comes to mind. So there's a story, I actually write about it in my book, but I'll give you a very short version. So there was a young boy who broke his femur in the slum and needed nursing care, which we then took on and took him into our home. And I brought him home from hospital so we didn't have to pay to admit him into hospital in this spiker cast, which is, I don't know if you've seen children when they break that bone, they're plastered from the waist down to the knees and the leg with the broken bone down to the ankle. And then they have a bar across the knees to hold their hips everything at the right place, and a little hole in the plaster so they could go to the toilet. It's quite horrific to see. And this little boy, obviously, I'm bringing him into the slum, which is definitely not suitable for a wheelchair. I did actually drop him out of that wheelchair twice, and the plaster cracked. And once, embarrassingly, he was in front of all of the people on the corner, and it's like, and there he is, literally on all fours, just there. He can't, because it's very lumpy, some concrete, some wood kind of pathways. So I brought him home to nurse him at home, and I remember all my immediate neighbours, and we lived literally within 2 feet of each other. So there was all the ladies kind of a bit older than me that used to sit around the corner of the house, and they came in and they gave me a good telling off, saying, "You stupid foreigner," that farang is what they call Westerners, you're going to bring bad luck into your house, and you shouldn't be taking in a kid in a wheelchair. It's going to be bad for your family. And I remember saying to them, I said, look, as a Christian, I don't believe in that. I believe that good and bad things happen to good people, and good and bad things happen to bad people. We live in a broken world, and and ultimately God will redeem that. And so I said it in much more normal kind of words, but in my best Thai I could. And they're like, "Oh, you just don't get it. You don't get it." We often end with, you foreigners, you don't get it. And I'd be so frustrated. I hated being the dumb farang all the time. That was my big ego journey. I was always like, "Oh, you're just a dumb farang. You don't understand." And anyway, about 2 days later, it was the beginning of the summer holidays, of course. So I had to take Plaster Boy, as we call him, and my son, and then his brother, who'd also moved into our house, and all to work with me at the little community centre around the corner. And that day I'm in the jewellery room. We used to do Klong Toy handicrafts, so we were packing boxes for Australia, and the kids were all running around. And I heard some yelling, and I saw one of the motorbike taxi drivers coming running towards me carrying my son, and he'd been run over by a pickup truck that had reversed over his leg. And we quickly pile into the back of another truck, including Plaster Boy and the wheelchair, and off we go to the hospital. It was the same hospital that I had taken Plaster Boy to have his operation, and it was the same rotation of staff, and I had to go, I promise I don't break little 7-year-old boys' legs. Anyway, as very different experience to the first boy, because we had insurance, we could afford it. He was instantly given morphine, put out of pain. We were given a beautiful, the rooms were ridiculous. They're like 5-star hotel suites, and, a doctor and a nurse for every little bit of, and my son wasn't in any pain. And because he was well nourished, he literally just cracked a bone in his foot, it being run over by a truck, whereas the other boy had broken his femur falling off a swing set, so that gives you but I remember coming home from hospital late at night and putting the boys to bed, and Ash was in England at the time speaking at something, and the ladies were all out there waiting to have another go. And I remember just saying, I know what you all think. You all think this happened because I took little boy into our house, and I'm really angry at God because now you all think the wrong thing, and I don't get why God would let that happen. And I know bad things have to happen in this world, and but I really don't understand why God let that happen. And later that night, there was a knock on the door, and there was a lady standing there holding this quite severely disabled little girl who was born with hip dysplasia and 2 clubbed feet. And she said, "Angie, would you help my daughter?" And she'd been locked in the house. None of us knew she was even in there. She was literally 50 metres from our door. And because of shame and karmic beliefs, she was just kept in there, because people believe if you have a child with a disability, you've done something wrong in your past life, or someone in your family has. So there's not really any sort of compassion for you. And anyway, we went on this journey then for the next 2 years, getting operations for her, getting physio. A lot of Australian people supported this grandma so she could leave her job and nurse this child, because we would literally have to sleep under the hospital bed in the poorer hospitals and feed the child, or the child wouldn't get fed. So we all did our shifts. And you know, at the end of that, I was able to really share with those ladies, I think that God really used that, because now this little girl is running around out of school. I got to years later go back and see her at school running around, and she'll have a normal life, you know. And so I was able to share about how I believe, you know, that while I don't think God wants bad things to happen, this world is a broken place, but that he was able to use that. So this little girl now has a life. And the ladies are all like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, not really sure what I think. But I felt like that was a really evangelistic moment in my life where I could just be honest at my disappointment in God around non-Christian people. I hate using that term, but non-church people. And it wasn't, I don't think God minded. I think that was really important that I could be honest about that. And I said, because I talked about that, and I said, I think God's big enough and strong enough to cope with me being angry at him. And, you know,